energy disruptors. Please welcome to the stage Apoorv Sinha, CEO, Carbon Upcycling Technologies.
Hi, everyone. My name is Apoorv Sinha, and I wanted to talk about disruption from a systemic standpoint. So I want to start with someone who's recognized for having crazy hair, but it's not the guy you would think of. It's actually him. His hair is probably half my height, but he wrote a book in the early 2000s called Blink. And the book was about a very interesting story about a US war game, which involves another individual called Paul Van Riper. Paul was an ex-Marine Corps. He served in Vietnam. He served in the Gulf War, the first Gulf War. And he was actually retired in 2002 when he was approached by the US Army to participate in what they called the Millennium Challenge. Now, keep in mind, this is before the Iraq War, but this is after 9/11. And what the US was trying to do is look at disruption in the war field. So they were saying, what can the US Army do come 2010 to be prepared and use every resource at their disposal to defeat the enemy quickly and without a lot of loss in life. So Paul was given a fairly difficult challenge in this war game. He was assigned to be in the red team. And the red team was basically the Middle Eastern enemy. And they had very little resources. They weren't given any access to big data or command centers, no integration away from the small teams that were in the battlefield. The other team, on the other hand, the blue team, was America in 2010. The overall war game took over $250 million. It took over 17,000 soldiers from across the country and the world to participate in this, and over 10 locations were used in this war game. And I can, from every account that we've read on this, most of that $250 million and the 17,000 went to support the blue cause. In a sense, it was very similar to fighting war when you can text each other versus using pigeons to deliver your messages. Paul had messengers that would go literally manually to deliver whatever secret codes they were using, whereas the blue team had what they call the Joint Force Command Center, where they'd be able to communicate not only on a tactical level with whatever they were seeing, but at a strategic level so that they can see the battlefield as a whole, see the entire country, see if they need reinforcements from Europe or elsewhere in the simulated exercise. Now, I'm not sure who you'd be betting on, and I don't know how many of you have read the book, but it's interesting because the red team, the 300, they won. They actually beat them within the first couple of days. And the blue team actually lost so badly, and it was so much against the established hypothesis that all this big data is going to help, that they redid the challenge within 3 months. And if you were to read the conclusions in the reports about what they learned from the Millennium Challenge, it says big data and disruption is the way to go. So Paul Van Riper got a bit annoyed about that. He was a middle-aged general. He went back and confronted them on some of the findings. But I think there is an important lesson that we can learn about how to be a small player and a big player when your field is being disrupted, whether it's the war field or the field of energy. And that's really where I want to segue into how disruption happens, at least based on some of the common theories that are established as the thought leaders in our space today. I find this picture to be quite remarkable. When the automation effects started to take place, and is still taking place today, it wasn't as if that happened overnight. Like most of the workers that you see on the left-hand side of the screen did not lose their jobs the same day as an automated hand came in and displaced each one of them. It took time, and a lot of times disruption gets lost because it takes a long time to happen. It seems disruptive in hindsight, but in foresight, as you look into the future, it takes time, and you say, oh, well, it'll still take longer, and you just bide your time and see when it's going to affect your job, by when it's usually too late. But if you look at some of the common theories, one of the thought leaders in this space is Clay Christensen, who wrote The Innovator's Dilemma and The Innovator's Solution. And one of the things they talk about is disruption can be sustaining, or it can be truly disruptive in that it creates a new market by changing the economics of something. So it makes something cheaper so that more people can buy it, like the industrial age did for us. Pretty much everyone here is wearing clothes that are a part or a product of the Industrial Revolution. Most of us drive cars that basically found it from there. That was a disruptive age. Some of the other disruption that we see tends to be more marginal. It tends to be sustaining. iPhone 10 versus iPhone 1, for example. But the real interesting point about people that have served or done well in disruptive environments versus not is agility. Most of them have been able to recognize, whether it's over a decade time cycle, a month, or a few years, that they need to be agile, and they need to be able to respond to changes that happen quickly enough so that they can actually adapt and make changes. Sir Richard Branson yesterday talked about how he wanted to move from labels because he realized that the industry is going somewhere else. And so I think from him to many, many small entrepreneurs all across the world, there are people and good examples of people that have adapted before they were forced to or forced out of the business, and others that weren't as agile despite what the environment required them to do. But agility, whether you're a small player, you're the red team, or the blue team, I think is a critical aspect and an asset that any evolving organization needs to improve on and make its workers good at. The energy industry in particular is interesting. It's very segmented, it's decentralized in many ways. Every country has its own energy system. In Canada, every province has its own. And because of the complex nature of situations, whether it's a small town in northeastern Alberta or a big city like Calgary, I think there are different levels of disruption that we all need to be cognizant of and adapt to depending on where we play our part in the ecosystem. I wanted to end by talking about how we're playing a part. I think some of the bigger players get to see that bigger picture. They get to see that big blue team command center, and they get to see every troop that they have out in the battlefield. Smaller players, smaller companies don't necessarily get to see that, but they do bring agility and a new way of thinking that can be useful not only to the bigger players, who in this case aren't adversaries but potential partners, but also to the system as a whole. It needs both the big and the small to make it prosperous and to make it sustainable. And with that, I want to talk about where we thought we can make a change. And primarily, it's around the notion of recycling. When we started our company, Carbon Upcycling, 3.5 years ago, we knew that recycling is a big buzzword. I mean, there's still places like Texas where recycling isn't as common as it should be, even though there's no real technological resources holding it back. But we really think recycling is only a stepping stone towards upcycling, where a plastic bottle that you threw away today, in a second form, will not be a plastic bottle, but something better. And the technology that we've been working on is to take CO2, our pollution, as a technical component to enable that upcycling. We believe that that's the way to create a green future, to create a green team, which can learn from the lessons of both the blue and the red. And I just want to talk about where this can go. Currently, people think about using CO2 in biofuels. There's a lot of interest in that. There are people that talk about using it in high volumes in industries like concrete. But there's a range of different applications where it can make our society better, more efficient, and more sustainable. And some of the ones that we, just in our company, have explored are corrosion lining. So looking at sewage and wastewater systems that are basically legacy projects from the 1960s that are now at the age where they need to be replaced and improved. In this case, we found that some of the CO2 that we're sequestering can be used to make a more reliable future infrastructure program that can last more than 40, 50 years, and in fact, maybe even over 100 years. We found that we can use it in a new age of plastics, where the plastics can be made more easy to recycle and easier to process so that their energy footprint is lower. They can be used in concrete buildings to reduce this life cycle impact of any cubic meter of concrete that you use for a skyscraper project or a small one-floor building that you build in a municipality, or even in some of the more high-end applications like adhesives or pharmaceuticals. We believe that this new way of thinking just is a way of adopting that disruptive mindset in a way that isn't just forced on because we know that's where the future is going, but rather in a way that fits with our current market and serves some of the needs that we have today. Because if you really think about that story I started with, you can argue about who's the team you want to win. I mean, a lot of us have a thing for the underdog. We want the red team to win. But really, the blue team had all the cards right. I mean, they had the resources, they had the technology, and they had the vision. They wanted to be disruptive by using this data in a way that had never been done before. But they weren't able to really align that in a way that made sense with the realities on the ground. And instead of making their reality more agile and more adaptable, the big data actually hindered them. It encumbered them, like the sumo wrestler that I was trying to stretch earlier. If there's one message I want to leave here on the stage today, it's that really disruption comes in all colors. It comes with things that are black, like the carbon that we produce. It comes with green initiatives. It comes with energy, whether it's renewable, nuclear, or oil and gas-based. There's a lot of innovation happening in each of these sectors, and we believe that our part, at least in the near future, is to close the loop on the pollution cycle, on the greenhouse gas emission cycle, and see if we can make our own little footprint on this disruptive journey. Thank you so much.